The scream that tore through Violet Lancaster's throat came too late, swallowed by the dusty air of Snake River, Idaho. As her husband's calloused fingers twisted deeper into her auburn hair and yanked her off the wooden porch of Henderson's General Store. The summer of 1882 blazed overhead, the sun beating down mercilessly as Violet's knees scraped against the dirt street, her hands clawing uselessly at the iron grip that dragged her forward like a sack of grain. Every citizen of Snake River stood frozen on that sweltering afternoon, their faces a mixture of shock and shameful inaction, watching as Harold Lancaster, drunk and raging, hauled his 23-year-old wife through the center of town by her hair, cursing her with words that made even the saloon girls wince. But then a shadow fell across Harold's path, and a voice as steady as mountain stone cut through the chaos. "Let her go." The words belonged to Vaughn Quillan, a 26-year-old cowboy who had drifted into Snake River 3 months prior, working at the Broken Arrow Ranch just outside town. He stood there in the middle of Main Street, his tall frame relaxed but ready, his hazel eyes locked on Harold with an intensity that made the drunk man stumble backward. Vaughn's dark hair was dusty from a day's work, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-bronzed forearms, and though he carried no visible weapon, something in his stance suggested he knew exactly how to handle himself. Harold released Violet's hair with a violent shove that sent her sprawling into the dirt. "This is between me and my wife, Drifter. You'd best move along before I teach you about minding your own business." Vaughn's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "When a man drags a woman through the street like that, it becomes everyone's business, especially mine." The crowd had grown silent, every eye fixed on the confrontation unfolding before them. Violet pushed herself up on trembling arms, her face streaked with tears and dust, her simple cotton dress torn at the shoulder. She looked up at the cowboy who had stepped forward when no one else would, and something shifted in her chest, a feeling she could not name but would come to recognize as the first stirring of hope in a heart that had forgotten the sensation. Harold took a step toward Vaughn, swaying slightly. "You got no idea who you are dealing with, boy. My father practically built this town. The Lancasters own half the businesses here." "Then maybe you should act like someone worthy of that name," Vaughn replied, moving forward to place himself directly between Harold and Violet. "But right now, you are just a man who hurt someone smaller and weaker than yourself. Where I come from, we call that cowardice." The word hit Harold like a slap. His face flushed crimson and he lunged forward with a roar. But Vaughn was faster, sidestepping the clumsy attack and catching Harold's arm, using the drunk man's own momentum to send him stumbling into the water trough outside the general store. Harold came up sputtering, soaked and humiliated, as nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Daniels finally pushed his way forward, his hand on his gun belt more for show than necessity. All right. That is enough excitement for one day. Harold, you get yourself home and sleep this off. Vaughn, I appreciate you stepping in, but I will handle things from here." Vaughn did not move, his attention focused entirely on Violet, who had managed to stand but was shaking so badly she looked ready to collapse. He walked over to her slowly, as one might approach a frightened horse, and offered his hand. "Are you hurt, madam?" Violet stared at his outstretched hand as if it were something from another world. In 3 years of marriage to Harold Lancaster, not a single person in Snake River had ever intervened, ever questioned, ever cared. And now this stranger, this cowboy she had only seen from a distance at church or riding past on the road to the ranch, was looking at her as if she mattered. "I am all right," she whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. She placed her small hand in his, and the warmth of his grip sent a shock of awareness through her that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the quiet strength she felt flowing from him to her. Vaughn helped her to her feet, his touch gentle despite the obvious power in his hands. "Where can I take you? Do you have family here?" The question made Violet's eyes burn with fresh tears. "No, no family. They are all back in Ohio. I came here as Harold's bride 3 years ago, and I have not seen them since." "Then let me at least walk you somewhere safe," Vaughn said, but Harold was already climbing out of the water trough, dripping and furious. "She is coming home with me," Harold shouted. "She is my wife, and by law she belongs to me." Sheriff Daniels stepped between them, finally showing some backbone. "Harold, you are drunk and making a scene. Why don't you head over to the jail and cool off for a few hours? I will make sure Violet gets home safely." "This is not over," Harold spat, pointing a shaking finger at Vaughn. "You made a big mistake today, Drifter. A big mistake." As the sheriff led Harold away, still cursing and stumbling, the crowd began to disperse, though many cast backward glances at Violet and her unexpected defender. Mrs. Henderson, the general store owner's wife, hurried over with a shawl to cover Violet's torn dress and a cup of water. "Thank you," Violet managed, her voice barely audible. "That was brave of you, Mr. Quillan, Mrs. Henderson said to Vaughn, though her expression suggested she thought it might have been foolish as well. "The Lancasters have a lot of influence in this town. Then maybe they should use it for something better than terrorizing women," Vaughn replied. He looked at Violet, his eyes searching her face with concern. "Do you want to go back to that house?" The question hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation all at once. Violet's mind raced. Of course she could not just leave. She was married. Harold owned their home, controlled what little money she had access to, and knew everyone in town. Where would she go? What would she do? And yet the thought of walking back through that door, of facing him when the alcohol wore off and his rage returned, made her feel physically ill. "I do not have a choice," she said finally, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "There is always a choice," Vaughn said quietly. "It might not be an easy one, but it exists." Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. "Mr. Quillan, I appreciate what you did, but you do not understand how things work here. Violet is Harold's wife. The law says she has to go home to him." "The law also says a man cannot assault his wife in public," Vaughn countered, "though it seems Snake River prefers to look the other way." The accusation stung because it was true. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed, but she had no response. After an awkward moment, she patted Violet's shoulder and retreated into her store. Alone on the street, except for a few lingering onlookers, Violet finally raised her eyes to meet Vaughn's gaze directly. He was handsome, she realized, though not in the polished way Harold had been when they courted. Vaughn's face was weathered by sun and wind, his features strong and honest, and his eyes held a depth of feeling that took her breath away. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You do not know me." "Because it was the right thing to do," Vaughn said simply. "And because nobody deserves to be treated the way he was treating you." Something inside Violet cracked at those words, a wall she had built around her heart to survive the past 3 years. A sob escaped before she could stop it, and then she was crying in earnest, all the pain and humiliation and loneliness pouring out in gasping waves. Without thinking, Vaughn stepped closer and wrapped his arms around her, letting her weep against his chest while he murmured wordless comfort. They stood that way for several minutes, and Violet could not remember the last time someone had simply held her, offered comfort without demanding something in return. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back, embarrassed by the wet stain on his shirt. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should not have done that." You have nothing to apologize for, Vaughn assured her. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. Listen, I know you probably need to go home, but I want you to know something. If you ever need help, if things get bad, you can send word to the Broken Arrow Ranch. I will come. You understand? Violet nodded, clutching the handkerchief like a lifeline. Thank you. I do not even know what else to say except thank you. That is more than enough, Vaughn said with a gentle smile that transformed his serious face. Now, let me walk you back. I will make sure Harold is not there before I leave you. They walked in silence through the dusty streets of Snake River, past the saloon and the livery stable, past the small church where Violet had stood 3 years ago and promised to love Harold Lancaster in sickness and health, for better or worse. She had not known then that worse could feel like drowning in an endless well of fear and misery. The Lancaster house sat on the edge of town, a nice 2-story structure painted white with green shutters. It looked respectable and peaceful from the outside, which made it an excellent lie. Inside those walls, Violet had learned to move quietly, to anticipate Harold's moods, to make herself small and invisible whenever the darkness took hold of him. Vaughn walked up to the front door and knocked firmly. When no answer came, he tried the handle and found it unlocked. Stay here, he told Violet and went inside. She waited on the porch, her heart hammering, half expecting Harold to come barreling out. But Vaughn emerged after a few minutes, shaking his head. He is not here, probably still at the jail. But I want you to lock this door behind you, and if he comes back drunk and angry, you get out and go to Mrs. Henderson's or the church or anywhere else. Promise me. I promise, Violet said. Though they both knew promises were fragile things, Vaughn hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her. I meant what I said. Send word if you need me. Why are you being so kind to me? Violet asked again, needing to understand. You do not owe me anything. Vaughn looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them, an unspoken recognition. Maybe I just know what it is like to feel alone, he said finally. And I would not wish that on anyone. Then he tipped his hat, mounted the horse he had retrieved from the hitching post near the general store, and rode away, leaving Violet standing on her porch watching until he disappeared in a cloud of dust. That night, Harold did not come home. Violet barely slept, jumping at every sound, but the house remained empty and silent. When morning came, she went about her usual routine, making breakfast that no one ate, tidying rooms that were already clean, trying to convince herself that yesterday had really happened and was not just some fever dream. Around noon, Harold finally appeared, looking haggard and subdued. He did not meet her eyes as he walked past her into the kitchen and poured himself coffee. Sheriff made me spend the night in jail, he said, his voice rough. Said I needed to cool off. Violet said nothing, standing near the doorway with her hands clasped tightly together. Harold took a long drink of coffee, then set the cup down with more force than necessary. That cowboy made a fool of me yesterday, made me look weak in front of the whole town. You did that yourself, Violet said before she could stop the words. Harold's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, Violet thought he would explode again, but something held him back. Maybe it was the memory of Vaughn Quillan standing between them, or maybe it was the way Violet met his gaze without flinching for the first time in years. Watch your mouth, Harold warned, but there was less heat in it than usual. I am going to the office. I expect dinner on the table when I get back. He left without another word, and Violet sagged against the doorframe, trembling with the adrenaline of defiance. She had never spoken back to him before, never challenged him. And she realized with growing clarity that something fundamental had shifted inside her yesterday when Vaughn Quillan had stepped forward. She had been reminded that she was a person who deserved basic dignity, and once that knowledge took root, it was impossible to forget. Over the next few days, Violet found herself thinking constantly about the cowboy. She learned from town gossip that he was well respected at the Broken Arrow Ranch, known for his skill with horses and his quiet, steady manner. He had come from somewhere in Montana, though nobody knew much about his past. He was not married, which made several of the single women in Snake River take notice, but he seemed uninterested in socializing, keeping mostly to himself. Violet knew she should not care. She was a married woman, and entertaining thoughts about another man was wrong, sinful even. But she could not help the way her heart lifted when she saw him ride into town on Saturday for supplies, or the way her breath caught when their eyes met across the street outside the bank. Vaughn touched his hat in greeting, and Violet felt color rise to her cheeks as she nodded back. Harold noticed. Of course Harold noticed. "You stay away from that drifter," he told her that evening, grabbing her wrist hard enough to bruise. "I see the way you look at him. You are my wife, Violet. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes," she whispered, because what else could she say? But understanding and obeying were two different things. When Vaughn appeared at church the following Sunday, sitting in the back pew by himself, Violet found her gaze drawn to him repeatedly throughout the service. And when everyone filed outside afterward, she made sure to linger near the edge of the crowd, hoping for a moment to speak with him. "Mrs. Lancaster," Vaughn said, approaching her with his hat in his hands. "It is good to see you looking well." "Thank you, Mr. Quillan," Violet replied, acutely aware of the curious glances from other churchgoers. "I never properly thanked you for your kindness last week." "No thanks necessary," Vaughn said. "I was just glad I could help." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, both aware of Harold watching them from across the churchyard with barely concealed anger. "How are things?" Vaughn asked quietly, his eyes searching her face. "Are you safe?" Violet wanted to tell him the truth, that Harold had been on edge all week, that the bruise on her wrist throbbed whenever she moved her arm, that she was terrified of what would happen when Harold's controlled fury finally broke. But this was the churchyard, surrounded by the entire town, and she was supposed to maintain the fiction of her respectable marriage. "Everything is fine," she lied, and saw Vaughn's jaw tighten with frustration. "Violet," Harold's voice cut across the yard. "Come here, we are leaving." Violet flinched at his tone but managed a polite smile for Vaughn. "Good day, Mr. Quillan." "Good day, Mrs. Lancaster," Vaughn replied, but his eyes followed her as she walked away, and she could feel the weight of his concern like a physical thing. That night, Harold's anger finally exploded. He accused Violet of making a spectacle of herself, of disrespecting him in front of the entire congregation, of wanting that cowboy. She tried to deny it, tried to calm him, but nothing worked. He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her so hard her teeth rattled, then shoved her against the wall. "You are mine," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "Nobody else is ever going to want you. Nobody else is ever going to care about you. Do you understand?" But even as Violet nodded, tears streaming down her face, she knew it was not true, because someone had cared. Someone had stepped forward when everyone else stood still. And that knowledge gave her a tiny seed of courage that Harold could not shake loose no matter how hard he tried. When Harold finally stormed out to the saloon, Violet sat on the floor of her kitchen and made a decision. She could not keep living like this. She could not keep pretending that this was normal or acceptable or what God intended for marriage. She needed help, and there was only one person who had offered it. The next morning, after Harold left for his office at the Lancaster lumber mill, Violet walked to the general store with her head held high. Mrs. Henderson looked surprised to see her but greeted her warmly enough. Mrs. Henderson, Violet said quietly, glancing around to make sure they were alone. I need to get a message to someone at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Is there any way to do that without it becoming town gossip? Mrs. Henderson's expression softened with understanding. My nephew works out there. He goes every few days with deliveries. I could have him pass along a note if you like. Thank you, Violet breathed. Thank you so much. She spent the afternoon crafting the message, crossing out and rewriting it a dozen times before settling on something simple. Things are not well. I may need that help you offered. Violet Lancaster. Mrs. Henderson's nephew, a gangly boy of 16 named Peter, took the sealed note without asking questions and promised to deliver it directly to Vaughn Quillan. Violet went home feeling as if she had just set something irreversible into motion, but instead of fear, she felt relief. 2 days later, Violet was hanging laundry in her small backyard when she heard a horse approaching. Her heart leaped, thinking it might be Vaughn, but it was only the mail carrier delivering a package for Harold. Still, the anticipation made her restless, and she found herself constantly watching the road, jumping at every sound. Vaughn did not come that day, or the next. Violet began to worry that he had not received her message, or worse, that he had decided helping her was too much trouble. But on the 4th day after she had sent the note, as she was drawing water from the well behind her house, she heard her name spoken softly. Mrs. Lancaster. She spun around to find Vaughn standing at the edge of her property, partially hidden by the cottonwood trees that lined the fence. He must have walked rather than ridden to avoid drawing attention. Mr. Quillan, she said, her voice catching with emotion. You came. Of course I came, he said, moving closer. Your note said things were not well. What happened? Violet hesitated, suddenly unsure how to put her life into words. But Vaughn's patient, concerned expression made it easier. Slowly, haltingly, she told him about Sunday at church, about Harold's rage that night, about the years of walking on eggshells and trying to be perfect enough that he would stop being angry. It is never enough, she finished quietly. No matter what I do, it is never enough. And I realize that if I stay, he is going to keep hurting me. Maybe one day he will hurt me so badly that I do not get back up. Vaughn's hands had clenched into fists while she spoke, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. You need to leave him, he said bluntly. Tonight, if possible. Pack what you can carry and get out of that house. And go where? Violet asked, spreading her hands helplessly. I have no money of my own, no family here, no skills that would let me support myself. Harold made sure of that. He said women did not need to work or have their own funds because their husbands would take care of them. You can come to the Broken Arrow, Vaughn said immediately. The boss, Mr. Raymond, has a good heart. I am sure he and his wife would let you stay there until we figure something out. Mrs. Raymond is always saying she could use help with the house and garden. Harold would come for me, Violet said. He would drag me back and then things would be even worse. Not if you were under the protection of the ranch, Vaughn countered. Mr. Raymond does not take kindly to men who hurt women. He would stand up to Harold, and he has enough hands working for him that Harold would not dare try anything. Hope fluttered in Violet's chest, fragile and terrifying. You really think this could work? I know it can, Vaughn said with conviction. But you have to be brave enough to take the first step. Are you? Violet thought about the bruises on her arms, the constant fear, the suffocating loneliness of her marriage. She thought about what her life would look like in 5 years, 10 years, if nothing changed. And then she thought about the way Vaughn had looked at her in the street that day, as if she were someone worth protecting. Yes, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Yes, I am brave enough. Vaughn's face broke into the first genuine smile she had seen from him, and it transformed him, making him look younger and impossibly handsome. Good. Then here is what we are going to do. Tomorrow is Saturday. Harold usually goes to the saloon after work, right? Violet nodded. He is usually there from 6 until late. Perfect. I will bring a wagon and meet you here at 7. Pack whatever you can, but do not take so much that he will notice things missing before then. And Violet. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder, the gesture brief but full of reassurance. You are doing the right thing. I promise you that. After he left, Violet went inside and looked around the house she had lived in for 3 years. None of it really felt like hers anyway. Harold had owned this house before their marriage, had furnished it to his own tastes, had made all the decisions about how things should be arranged. The only truly personal possessions she had were her mother's locket, a few dresses she had brought from Ohio, and a Bible her grandmother had given her. Everything else could be left behind. That night, Harold came home from the saloon in a foul mood, complaining about some business deal that had fallen through. Violet made him dinner and stayed quiet, letting him rant without interruption. When he finally fell into bed, drunk and exhausted, she lay awake beside him planning her escape, counting the hours until freedom. Friday dragged by with agonizing slowness. Violet went through her normal routine, but everything felt surreal, as if she were watching herself from outside her body. When Harold came home for lunch, she was convinced he could read the guilt on her face, but he barely looked at her, eating quickly before returning to the mill. That evening, Harold left for the saloon as usual, calling over his shoulder that she should not wait up. As soon as he was gone, Violet flew into action. She pulled out the worn carpet bag she had brought from Ohio and began packing. Her hands shook as she folded her dresses, tucked her locket safely into a pocket, wrapped her grandmother's Bible in a shawl. She took a few personal items, a hairbrush, some ribbons, nothing that Harold would miss immediately. She was just fastening the bag when she heard the sound of wagon wheels outside. Her heart hammered as she peeked through the curtains and saw Vaughn climbing down from a buckboard, his movements quick and efficient. She grabbed her bag and met him at the back door. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "Ready," she confirmed, though her whole body was trembling. Vaughn took her bag and helped her up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her and snapped the reins. The horse moved forward, and Violet twisted around to look back at the white house with green shutters, watching it grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared from view. "You all right?" Vaughn asked after a few minutes of silence. "I think so," Violet said. "It is strange. I thought I would feel more afraid, but mostly I just feel relieved." "That is good," Vaughn said. "Though you might feel differently tomorrow when the reality sets in. That is normal too." They rode through the growing darkness, leaving Snake River behind and heading into the open country, where the Broken Arrow Ranch sprawled across several thousand acres. The night air was cool and clear, full of the sound of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Violet breathed it in deeply, feeling as if she were tasting freedom for the first time. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Anything. Why have you never married? You must be, what, 26 or 27? 26, Vaughn confirmed. "And I guess I just never found the right person. I have moved around a lot, worked on different ranches, never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. My parents died when I was young, and I have been on my own since I was 17. It is hard to build a life with someone when you are always moving." "Is that why you came to Snake River?" "Partly," Vaughn admitted, "but also because I was getting tired of drifting. I have been thinking lately that it might be nice to have a place to belong, people who matter. The Broken Arrow feels like it could be that place, if I let it." Violet understood that longing better than he knew. She had been lonely in her marriage, yes, but she had been lonely long before that too, ever since she left Ohio. Maybe that was why she had agreed to marry Harold after such a brief courtship. She had wanted so desperately to belong somewhere, to someone, that she had ignored all the warning signs. The main house of the Broken Arrow Ranch appeared in the distance, its windows glowing with lamplight. As they approached, the front door opened and a middle-aged couple stepped out onto the porch. The man was tall and lean with graying hair, while the woman was petite with kind eyes and graying brown hair pulled back in a simple bun. "That is Mr. and Mrs. Raymond," Vaughn said. "I sent word ahead that we were coming. They know the situation." Thomas Raymond helped Violet down from the wagon while his wife, Margaret, immediately swept her into a warm embrace that made Violet's eyes sting with tears. "You poor dear," Margaret said. "Come inside, come inside. We have a room all ready for you, and I have got soup warming on the stove. You must be exhausted." The inside of the ranch house was comfortable and welcoming, full of well-worn furniture and the smell of cooking. Margaret led Violet to a small bedroom upstairs while Thomas and Vaughn spoke in low voices below. "This was our daughter's room before she married and moved to Oregon," Margaret explained. "It is not much, but it is yours for as long as you need it. And Violet, I want you to know that Harold Lancaster has no power here. My husband will make sure of that." "Thank you," Violet whispered. "I do not know how to repay your kindness." "Nonsense," Margaret said briskly. "We help people who need it. That is what decent folk do. Now, you wash up and come down for some food. Tomorrow we will worry about the rest." Violet did as she was told, washing her face and hands in the basin provided, then changing into a fresh dress. When she came downstairs, she found Vaughn, Thomas, and Margaret sitting at the large kitchen table with bowls of soup and fresh bread. "Sit, sit," Margaret urged, and Violet took the empty chair beside Vaughn. The soup was delicious, rich with vegetables and beef, and Violet realized she had barely eaten all day. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Thomas cleared his throat. "Vaughn has explained your situation," he said, "and I want you to know that you are welcome here. Harold Lancaster might have influence in town, but he has got no say over what happens on my land. If he comes here making trouble, I will handle it." "I do not want to put you in danger," Violet said quickly. "Harold can be very vindictive when he is angry." "Let me worry about that," Thomas said with a reassuring smile. "I have been running this ranch for 30 years. I can handle a bully like Harold Lancaster. Now, Margaret mentioned that you might be willing to help around the house in exchange for room and board." "Absolutely," Violet said eagerly. "I can cook, clean, sew, garden, whatever you need. I want to earn my keep." "Then it is settled," Margaret said, patting Violet's hand. "You will be my helper and we will figure out the rest as we go. For now, you just focus on settling in and feeling safe." After dinner, Vaughn walked Violet out onto the porch while Thomas and Margaret cleaned up inside. The night was beautiful, the sky scattered with more stars than Violet had ever seen in town. "How are you really feeling?" Vaughn asked, leaning against the porch railing. "Scared," Violet admitted. "But also hopeful, which is something I have not felt in a very long time. Thank you for making this happen, Vaughn. Thank you for caring enough to help me." "You do not have to thank me," Vaughn said, turning to face her. In the dim light from the windows, his face was all shadows and angles, but his eyes were warm. "I just want you to be safe and happy. You deserve that, Violet. You deserve so much more than what Harold gave you." The way he said her name made her breath catch. Standing there in the darkness with him, Violet felt something shift inside her, something that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way her heart beat faster when he looked at her. I should let you get some rest, Vaughn said, though he made no move to leave. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. Harold will know you are gone by then. What do you think he will do? Hard to say, Vaughn said honestly. But whatever it is, we will deal with it together. You are not alone anymore, Violet. Remember that. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and watched as he walked off toward the bunkhouse where the ranch hand slept. Only after he disappeared from view did she go back inside, her mind swirling with confusing emotions that had no business existing in the heart of a married woman. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine and the sounds of the ranch coming to life. Violet woke early, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was and why. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Margaret already in the kitchen, kneading bread dough. "Good morning, dear," Margaret said cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Violet admitted. It was true. Without Harold beside her, without the constant tension and fear, she had slept deeply for the first time since she could remember. "Wonderful," Margaret said. "Now, why do not you start by helping me with breakfast? The hands will be coming in soon, and they always have hearty appetites." Violet threw herself into the work, grateful for something to occupy her hands and mind. She helped Margaret prepare eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee for the dozen ranch hands who worked the Broken Arrow. When they filed in for breakfast, Vaughn among them, Violet felt suddenly self-conscious. But the men were respectful and polite, thanking her for the food and making small talk about the day's work ahead. Vaughn caught her eye across the table and smiled, and Violet felt warmth spread through her chest. After breakfast, the men headed out to their various tasks, and Violet helped Margaret clean up. They were washing dishes when they heard the sound of a horse approaching fast. Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face serious. "Harold Lancaster is here," he said. "He is demanding to see Violet." Violet's hands froze in the dishwater, her heart lurching with panic. "What should I do?" "You should stay right here," Margaret said firmly, drying her hands on her apron. "Thomas will handle this." But Violet shook her head. She had run from Harold once. She did not want to keep hiding. "No, I need to face him. I need to tell him myself that I am not coming back." "Are you sure?" Thomas asked, looking doubtful. "I am sure," Violet said, squaring her shoulders. "But would you stay with me? I do not want to be alone with him." "Of course," Thomas said. They walked outside together to find Harold sitting on his horse in the front yard, his face red with fury. Several ranch hands had stopped their work to watch, including Vaughn, who stood near the barn with his hand resting on his hip near where Violet knew he kept a knife. "Violet," Harold shouted when he saw her. "Get over here right now. We are going home." "I am not going anywhere with you, Harold," Violet said, her voice shaking but clear. "I am not your wife anymore, not in any way that matters." "The law says you are my wife," Harold spat. "You belong to me, and I am taking you back whether you like it or not." "The lady said she is not going," Thomas interjected calmly. "And since she is a guest on my property, I suggest you respect that." Harold's eyes narrowed. "You have got no right to interfere in my marriage, Raymond. That is my wife, and I am within my legal rights to take her home." "Maybe so," Thomas said. "But I am also within my legal rights to refuse you entry to my property. And if you try to take Violet by force, I will have you arrested for trespassing and assault." Sheriff Daniels might be reluctant to go against the Lancaster name, but Judge Morrison is not. He is a fair man, and he does not take kindly to men who abuse their wives. Harold looked around at the gathered ranch hands, all of whom had stopped working to watch the confrontation. His gaze landed on Vaughn, and his expression twisted with hatred. "This is your doing, drifter," he snarled. "You poisoned my wife against me, turned her into some kind of rebellious woman who thinks she can just walk away from her marriage vows." Vaughn stepped forward, his movements deliberate and controlled. I did not poison anyone against anything. Violet left because you hurt her. Because you dragged her through the street by her hair while the whole town watched. Because you are a drunk and a bully who does not deserve the gift of her loyalty. Harold dismounted in a fury, stalking toward Vaughn. I am going to make you regret the day you stepped foot in Snake River. You are welcome to try, Vaughn said evenly. But right now, you are outnumbered and outmatched, so I suggest you get back on your horse and leave before this gets ugly. For a moment, it seemed Harold would attack anyway. His fists clenched and he took another step toward Vaughn. But Thomas moved to stand beside Vaughn, and then two more ranch hands joined them, forming a wall between Harold and Violet. Harold looked at Violet one last time, his expression a mixture of rage and something that might have been hurt. You will regret this, he said. You will come crawling back, and when you do, I will make sure you remember your place. I will never come back, Violet said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. I would rather live in poverty alone than spend another day in that house with you. Harold's face went purple with rage, but he had enough sense left to realize he was defeated, at least for now. He mounted his horse and yanked on the reins so hard the animal whinnied in protest. This is not over, he shouted as he rode away. The whole town will hear about this. You will be ruined, Violet. Nobody will have anything to do with you. They watched him go in silence. Only when he disappeared from view did Violet allow herself to sag against the porch railing, her legs suddenly weak. Vaughn was at her side in an instant, his hand on her elbow steadying her. You were incredibly brave, he said quietly. I know that was not easy. I thought I would feel different, Violet said. I thought I would feel triumphant or something, but mostly I just feel sad. Sad for the girl I was when I married him, sad for all the years I wasted, sad that it had to end this way. That is normal, Margaret said, joining them on the porch. Grief is complicated even when you are grieving something that hurt you. Come inside, dear. Let me make you some tea. The rest of that day passed in a strange haze. Violet helped Margaret with various household tasks, grateful for the distraction. But her mind kept returning to the confrontation with Harold, replaying it over and over, wondering if she had done the right thing. It was Vaughn who finally pulled her out of her spiral. He found her that evening sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and he settled into the chair beside her without asking permission. You are thinking too much, he observed. How can you tell? You get this little crease right here, he said, reaching over to gently touch the space between her eyebrows. The brief contact sent electricity through her. It appears whenever you are worrying about something. Violet was suddenly very aware of how close he was, of the way the fading sunlight caught in his hair, of the warmth radiating from his body. They had spent so much time together over the past few days, but always with other people around. This felt different, intimate in a way that made her pulse quicken. What if I did the wrong thing? She asked. What if Harold was right and I am ruining my reputation and nobody in town will speak to me now? Then those people are not worth knowing, Vaughn said firmly. Violet, you left a man who hurt you. You chose your own safety and well-being over what society expects. That does not make you wrong, that makes you strong. I do not feel strong, she admitted. I feel terrified. What am I going to do, Vaughn? I cannot live here forever, taking advantage of the Raymonds' kindness. I need to figure out how to support myself, but I have no skills, no money, nowhere to go. Then we will figure it out together, Vaughn said. One step at a time. You do not have to have all the answers right now. Why are you being so good to me? Violet asked, the question that had been haunting her since the day in the street. You barely know me. You have already done so much more than anyone could expect. Why do you keep helping? Vaughn was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "Because from the moment I saw you in that street, something in me recognized something in you," he said. "Maybe it was the loneliness, or the courage it takes to survive in a situation like that, or just the fact that you looked at me like I was someone worth noticing. I do not know. All I know is that I could not walk away then, and I cannot walk away now. And if I am being completely honest, I do not want to." Violet's breath caught in her throat. She knew what he was really saying, could hear the unspoken feelings beneath the words. And the terrifying thing was that she felt it too, this pull toward him that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with genuine attraction and affection. "Vaughn," she whispered, "I am still married." "I know," he said, "and I am not asking you for anything, Violet. I am just telling you the truth because I think you deserve to know it. Whatever happens next, whatever you decide to do, I will be here. As a friend if that is all you want, or as something more if you ever decide you are ready for that." Violet turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw everything written plainly on his face. This tough, quiet cowboy who had stepped forward when everyone else stood still was offering her something she had never expected to find, the possibility of real love. "I am not ready," she said honestly. "Everything is too new, too confusing, but I think maybe someday I could be." Vaughn's face broke into that rare, beautiful smile. "Someday is more than enough for me." They sat together on that porch until full dark, talking about everything and nothing, and Violet felt something she had not felt in years: contentment. Whatever came next, whatever challenges Harold threw at her, at least she would not be facing them alone. The next few weeks passed in a strange but pleasant routine. Violet threw herself into helping Margaret run the household, learning to cook for a small army of ranch hands, and managing the complex web of tasks required to keep the broken arrow running smoothly. She had a natural knack for organization, and Margaret was delighted to have such capable help. The trouble they had anticipated from Harold never materialized, at least not in any overt way. But Violet heard through the town grapevine that he was spreading rumors about her, painting her as an ungrateful, rebellious wife who had abandoned her husband for a drifter. Some people in Snake River believed him, but others, particularly the women who had witnessed that day in the street, defended Violet quietly. Mrs. Henderson sent word through her nephew that Violet was welcome at the general store anytime, and Reverend Walsh from the church came out to the ranch personally to let Violet know that she was not excommunicated from the congregation, regardless of what Harold might claim. "God does not expect you to stay in a situation where you are being harmed," the elderly minister told her. "Harold has always misunderstood what the scriptures say about marriage. It is meant to be a partnership built on love and respect, not ownership." Those words meant more to Violet than Reverend Walsh probably realized. She had carried so much guilt about leaving, worried that she was committing some unforgivable sin. To hear a man of God tell her otherwise was a profound relief. As June gave way to July, the Idaho summer blazed hot and bright. Violet learned to tend the garden, preserve vegetables, and manage the chickens that provided eggs for the household. She grew stronger both physically and emotionally, the constant fear that had marked her life with Harold slowly fading. And always, Vaughn was there. He did not push or pressure, but he found small ways to be near her, to make her smile, to remind her that she was valued. He brought her wildflowers he found while riding fence lines. He taught her to ride the gentle mare that Margaret had assigned to her use. He sat with her on the porch in the evenings, their conversations ranging from silly to serious to everything in between. Violet found herself falling, slowly and inevitably, deeply in love with him. It was nothing like what she had felt for Harold during their brief courtship. That had been infatuation mixed with desperation to escape her lonely life in Ohio. This was different, built on genuine friendship and respect, on truly knowing another person and being known in return. One Sunday in late July, Violet decided she was ready to return to church in town. She had been avoiding it, afraid of the whispers and stares, but Margaret convinced her that hiding would only make things worse. "You hold your head high," Margaret told her. "You have got nothing to be ashamed of." Vaughn offered to accompany her, and Violet accepted gratefully. They rode into Snake River together in the ranch wagon, and Violet tried not to notice the way people stared as they walked into the church. Harold was there, sitting in his usual pew near the front with his parents. His face darkened when he saw Violet, but he did not make a scene. Violet and Vaughn sat in the back, and Violet focused on the service, trying to ignore the prickling sensation of being watched. Afterward, as they filed outside, several women approached her, offering quiet words of support. "You are braver than I could ever be," one young wife whispered. "There are days I wish I had your courage." The words stayed with Violet long after they left town. She had not thought of herself as brave, but maybe she was. Maybe choosing to leave, choosing to save herself, was one of the bravest things a person could do. August arrived with scorching heat and news that set the whole territory talking. Idaho's territorial governor had announced new legislation making it easier for women to divorce abusive husbands. The law was not yet passed, but the fact that it was being seriously considered was revolutionary. "This could change everything," Margaret said excitedly over breakfast one morning. "If this passes, Violet, you could divorce Harold legally. You could be free. Free." The word echoed in Violet's mind like a prayer. She had been so focused on surviving day to day that she had not let herself imagine a future where she was truly free from Harold, where she could make her own choices without looking over her shoulder. "How long would something like that take?" Violet asked. "Hard to say," Thomas replied. "The territorial legislature moves slowly. Could be months, could be years, but it is a step in the right direction." That evening, Violet and Vaughn took their usual walk around the ranch, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. They had fallen into this routine over the past months, these quiet moments stolen at the end of long days where they could just be themselves without the weight of everyone else's expectations. "Margaret told me about the divorce law," Vaughn said as they walked. "That must be good news for you." "It is," Violet agreed. "Though I am trying not to get my hopes up too much. Even if it passes, Harold will fight it. He has money and influence. I have nothing." "You have me," Vaughn said quietly, "and the Raymonds, and more people in town than you realize. You are not alone in this, Violet." They had stopped walking and were standing near the creek that ran through the property, the sound of rushing water providing a peaceful backdrop. The sun had nearly set, painting everything in shades of purple and gold. "Vaughn," Violet said, her heart pounding. "If I were free, truly free, what would you want?" He looked at her with such intensity that it took her breath away. "What would I want?" he repeated. "I would want everything, Violet. I would want to court you properly, take you to dances, maybe convince you to marry me someday if you could stand the idea of trying again. I would want to build a life with you, have a family, grow old together. That is what I would want." Violet stepped closer to him, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "I would want that too," she whispered. "I would want all of that with you." "Violet," Vaughn breathed her name like a prayer. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "Can I kiss you?" she answered by rising on her toes and closing the distance between them. Their lips met softly at first, tentative and exploring, but then Vaughn wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, and the kiss deepened into something that made Violet's knees weak. She had never been kissed like this, with such tenderness and passion combined, as if she were something precious and desired in equal measure. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day I met you," he admitted. "I am glad you finally did," Violet said with a shaky laugh. They stood there by the creek until full dark, holding each other and talking about the future they hoped to build together. And for the first time since leaving Ohio all those years ago, Violet felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next few months were among the happiest of Violet's life, despite the legal complications of her situation. She and Vaughn made no secret of their feelings for each other, though they were careful to maintain propriety out of respect for the Raymonds and to avoid giving Harold more ammunition for his rumor campaign. In September, Violet received a letter from her parents in Ohio. Mrs. Henderson had helped her send word to them months ago, explaining her situation, and they had finally responded. Her mother wrote that they were proud of her for leaving Harold, that they had never liked him much, but had hoped he would treat her well. They invited her to come home to Ohio if she needed a safe place, but Violet knew her home was here now, with Vaughn and the Raymonds and the life she was building in Idaho. October brought the first snows to the mountains and news that the divorce legislation had passed the territorial legislature. Women in Idaho Territory could now petition for divorce on grounds of abuse, neglect, or abandonment. The law was not perfect, but it was a start. Violet wasted no time. With Thomas Raymond's help, she contacted a lawyer in Boise, the territorial capital, and began the process of filing for divorce. Harold contested it, of course, hiring his own lawyer and making wild claims about Violet's character. But Violet had witnesses, people who had seen Harold drag her through the street, and the judge hearing the case was known for his progressive views on women's rights. The divorce hearing was scheduled for February of 1883, which meant months more of waiting and uncertainty. But Violet faced it with a courage she had not known she possessed, bolstered by Vaughn's steady support and the knowledge that freedom was within reach. Winter settled over the Broken Arrow Ranch, bringing snow and cold but also a kind of peaceful beauty. Violet celebrated her first Christmas in years without fear, surrounded by people who cared about her. Vaughn gave her a beautiful hand-carved jewelry box he had made himself during the long winter evenings, and she gave him a scarf she had knitted in secret. "We are like an old married couple already," Vaughn joked as they sat by the fire on Christmas night, the rest of the household having gone to bed. "Not quite yet," Violet said, "but someday, if you are patient enough to wait." "I would wait forever for you," Vaughn said seriously. "But I am hoping it will not actually take that long." February arrived, bringing with it Violet's divorce hearing. She, Vaughn, and Thomas made the long trip to Boise, prepared to fight for Violet's freedom. The hearing lasted 3 days and was emotionally grueling. Harold's lawyer painted Violet as a disobedient wife who had abandoned her husband for another man. Violet's lawyer countered with testimony from multiple witnesses about Harold's abuse and drunkenness. In the end, the judge ruled in Violet's favor. He granted the divorce, citing Harold's documented abuse and public misconduct. Violet was free. She walked out of that courthouse with tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in as long as she could remember, they were tears of joy. Vaughn swept her into his arms right there on the steps, not caring who saw, and held her while she cried. "It is over," she kept saying. "It is finally over." "No," Vaughn corrected gently. "It is just beginning." They were married that spring in May of 1883 in a simple ceremony at the church in Snake River. Half the town turned out, and if some people disapproved of how quickly Violet had moved on, they kept it to themselves. The overwhelming sentiment was happiness for the couple who had found each other in such unlikely circumstances. Violet wore a dress of pale blue instead of white, her hair crowned with wildflowers that Vaughn had picked that morning. She walked down the aisle alone, needing no one to give her away, because she belonged to no one but herself. And when she reached the front of the church, where Vaughn stood waiting in his best suit, his face full of love and wonder, she knew with absolute certainty that this was what marriage was supposed to feel like. "I promise to love you, respect you, and stand beside you as an equal partner," Vaughn said during his vows. "I promise to never make you feel afraid or small. I promise to build a life with you where you can be everything you were meant to be." Violet's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to trust you with my heart, to build something beautiful with you, to face whatever comes with courage because I know you are beside me. You saved me when no one else would, and I will love you for that, and so much more for the rest of my days." The kiss that sealed their marriage was tender and full of promise, and the congregation erupted in applause. Thomas and Margaret gave them a piece of land on the edge of the Broken Arrow property as a wedding gift, and Vaughn built them a small house with his own hands over the course of that summer. It was modest but comfortable, with 2 bedrooms and a wide porch perfect for watching sunsets. Violet made it a home, filling it with curtains she sewed and furniture they bought together, and all the small touches that transformed a house into something more. She planted a garden and tended chickens, and learned to help Vaughn with the horse training operation he started on their land. In the fall of 1883, Violet discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Her own mother had lost 2 babies before Violet was born, and pregnancy in the frontier territories was dangerous even in the best circumstances. But Vaughn was attentive and protective throughout, and Margaret was a wealth of knowledge and support. In April of 1884, Violet gave birth to a healthy baby boy with his father's hazel eyes and his mother's auburn hair. They named him Thomas Vaughn Quillan, after the man who had given them sanctuary when they needed it most. Holding her son for the first time, Violet marveled at how completely her life had changed. 2 years ago, she had been trapped in a nightmare with no hope of escape. Now she had a husband who adored her, a son who depended on her, and a future full of possibilities. "What are you thinking?" Vaughn asked from his seat beside the bed, unable to take his eyes off his wife and child. "I am thinking that I am grateful," Violet said softly. "Grateful that you stepped forward that day when everyone else stood still. Grateful that I found the courage to leave. Grateful for every twist and turn that brought me here to this moment." Vaughn leaned over to kiss her forehead, then his son's. "I am the grateful one. You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. You made me believe in love again." As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter arrived in 1886, dark-haired and strong-willed like her mother, whom they named Grace Margaret. Another son followed in 1888, fair-haired and gentle, named Samuel. Their house rang with laughter and the chaos of children, and their land prospered under Vaughn's careful management. Violet heard through town gossip that Harold had remarried in 1885 to a young woman from Oregon who apparently had no knowledge of his first marriage's true nature. Violet felt a pang of sympathy for the new Mrs. Lancaster, but knew there was nothing she could do. She had saved herself. Harold's new wife would have to do the same if the need arose. As for Violet and Vaughn, they built the kind of marriage that inspired their children and impressed their neighbors. They worked side by side, raising their family and running their horse ranch with equal dedication. They had disagreements, of course, but Vaughn never raised his voice in anger, never used his size or strength to intimidate, never made Violet feel anything less than cherished. On their 10th wedding anniversary in May of 1893, they stood on their porch watching the sunset while their children played in the yard. Thomas was 9 now, tall for his age and already showing promise as a horseman. Grace was 7, bold and fearless in everything she did. Samuel was 5, quieter than his siblings but full of thoughtful wisdom. "You ever regret it?" Vaughn asked, his arm around Violet's waist. "Leaving Harold, marrying me, all of it." Violet turned to look at him, this man who had stepped forward when everyone else stood still, who had offered her protection and friendship and eventually love. His face was more weathered now, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but to her he was as handsome as the day they met. "Not for a single second," she said. "You gave me a life worth living, Vaughn. You gave me freedom and love and a family I adore. How could I ever regret that?" "I love you, Violet Quillan," Vaughn said, using the name that still made her heart flutter even after 10 years. "I love you too," she replied. "From that day in the street to this moment and every moment after. Always." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, their children's laughter floating on the evening air, and Violet knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of real love and the courage to reach for something better. Years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Thomas became a skilled horseman like his father, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day training operation. Grace, true to her bold nature, went away to school in Boys and became a teacher. Samuel surprised everyone by developing a talent for medicine and apprenticing with the doctor in Snake River. Violet and Vaughn aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. They celebrated their 20th anniversary, then their 30th, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren. The Quillan Ranch became known throughout Idaho Territory for producing the finest horses in the region, and Violet's reputation as a woman of strength and character spread just as far. She never forgot that day in the street, the moment when everything changed. And she never took for granted the miracle of having found real love after escaping the nightmare of her first marriage. Every morning when she woke beside Vaughn, every evening when they sat on their porch talking over the day's events, every holiday surrounded by their family, she felt grateful for the choice she had made and the man who had made it possible. Harold Lancaster faded from her thoughts over the years, becoming nothing more than a bad memory from another lifetime. She heard he died in 1895, thrown from a horse while drunk. She felt no particular emotion about it except perhaps relief that his second wife was finally free of him. As for Violet and Vaughn, they lived long, full lives. They saw Idaho Territory become a state in 1890, and watched the Wild West slowly transform into something more settled and civilized. They saw their children marry and have children of their own, creating a legacy that stretched far beyond the boundaries of their small ranch. On a warm evening in June of 1920, Violet and Vaughn sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. They were in their 60s now, their hair gray and their movements slower, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. Their youngest grandchild, a spirited girl of 5 named Violet Grace after both her grandmother and her aunt, played in the yard while her parents visited inside. "Do you remember the day we met?" Vaughn asked, his hand clasped with Violet's. "Every detail," Violet replied. "The heat, the dust, the fear. And then you, stepping forward when no one else would. You saved my life that day, Vaughn." "No," Vaughn corrected gently, as he had many times over the years. "You saved yourself, Violet. You found the courage to leave, to start over, to build something new. I just had the privilege of being there to help." "We saved each other then," Violet said with a smile. "How is that?" "That is perfect," Vaughn agreed, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing it tenderly. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their granddaughter chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The house behind them held nearly 40 years of memories, and the land around them bore witness to everything they had built together. Their children were happy and successful, their grandchildren were healthy and loved, and the legacy they would leave behind was one of courage, love, and the radical act of choosing happiness over duty. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Violet leaned her head on Vaughn's shoulder and breathed in the familiar scent of him, leather and soap, and the wild sage that grew on their land. This was home. This was love. This was the life she had fought so hard to claim, and it had been worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Vaughn asked. "For seeing me that day, for stepping forward, for loving me through all of it." Vaughn pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." They stayed on that porch until little Violet Grace fell asleep in the yard and had to be carried inside by her father. They stayed until the last light faded from the sky and the coyotes began their nightly chorus in the distant hills. They stayed because, after nearly 40 years together, there was nowhere else either of them would rather be than right there, side by side, facing whatever came next together. And when they finally went inside, locking up the house they had built with their own hands and their own love, Violet took one last look at the stars blazing overhead and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For the cowboy who had stepped forward, for the courage she had found within herself, for every twist of fate that had brought her from that terrible day in the street to this moment of perfect contentment. She had escaped the nightmare and found the dream. She had survived the darkness and walked into the light. And she had learned that love, real love, was nothing like what she had experienced in her first marriage. Real love was respect and partnership and choosing each other every single day. Real love was Vaughn Quillan's steady presence beside her, his hand reaching for hers in the darkness, his voice murmuring good night as they drifted off to sleep. The town of Snake River, Idaho, had watched her husband drag her by the hair all those years ago, and only the cowboy had stepped forward. But that single act of courage had set in motion a love story that would span decades and generations, proving that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is reach out a hand to someone who needs it. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is take that hand and hold on tight. Violet and Vaughn's story became legend in Snake River, passed down through their children and grandchildren as a testament to the power of courage and love. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could still exist. That even when everyone else stood still, one person stepping forward could change everything. That love, when it was real and true and built on a foundation of respect, could heal even the deepest wounds. They lived their remaining years in joy and peace, surrounded by the family they had created and the legacy they had built. And when Vaughn passed away in his sleep in 1925, with Violet's hand in his and their children gathered around his bed, His last words were of love for the woman who had made his life complete. Violet followed him 3 years later, her final breath a whisper of his name, and they were buried side by side on the hill overlooking their ranch, together even in death as they had been in life. Their story did not end there, though. It lived on in the memories of their descendants, in the land they had cultivated, in the horses whose lineage traced back to the ones Vaughn had trained, in the values they had instilled in their children about courage and kindness, and the importance of standing up for what was right. It lived on in every telling of the tale of the whole town watching as a man dragged his wife through the street by her hair, and only the cowboy stepped forward. That cowboy and that woman had built something beautiful from the ashes of pain and fear. They had created a love story that proved redemption was possible, that starting over was an act of bravery, that happy endings were real if you were willing to fight for them. And their story would continue to inspire for generations to come, a testament to the transformative power of love and the courage it takes to claim the life you deserve.